All right. Hi guys, I am Mary Poplin, and we're going to be going over planar tracking for rotoscoping. So the topics we're going to cover are going to be how the planar tracker works, how to track people for roto and more, and it's a little different when you're tracking for roto than when you're tracking to put effects on somebody. And we're also going to be covering animating roto shapes naturally, which means we're just going to talk a little bit about some animation techniques to make your keyframes less, to make your roto shapes look a little more correct. Holding out shapes from tracks, which basically has to do with layer order. If you've seen any of my previous demos, we talk about that a lot, but it's always good to drive that point home. We're also going to be talking about exporting as shapes, lines, effects, and mats, and we'll be going over miscellaneous time-saving techniques. So why should you use Mocha for rotoscoping? Well, basically you make Mocha your personal roto assistant, okay? So you cut your roto time in half because Mocha does a lot of the guiding for you. Then you can export your shapes to all formats, at least out of Pro. In the After Effects version, of course, you can export right into After Effects, no problem. You can render mats with motion blur out of Pro, and X-splines can increase your roto speed in any package. Also, Mocha has a pretty dedicated roto interface, unlike a lot of compositing programs, which tend to have their own tools, but they're limited. All right, so we're going to go to questions and answers later. Let me get out of my window here, and we will load up After Effects. So this is Adobe After Effects Creative Cloud, and we're going to look at this shot from Grimm. Basically, we're going to roto this shot because, it's a fairly simple intro. So what we're going to do is in After Effects, if you use the older version, CS4 and CS5, Mocha was a standalone inside of the plugins folder. In CS6 and CC, you find Mocha in the animation window. Well, find Mocha in the animation window, and for some reason, Creative Cloud is a little delayed when we access window menus. You know what? We're going to restart Creative Cloud. Oh, there we go. Okay, 1 second. So,
Always in a
I
live
hear they're
webinar,
fixing this, but right
right?
now, I know, right? It's just that it's just that way. So let me just click on this again, and we'll go to animation, and then we'll click on our layer. We'll go to animation. We'll go to track in Mocha for After Effects. Yeah, it wouldn't be a live demo if it didn't do something funky in front of, hundreds of people. All right, so when you start a new project in Mocha for After Effects, what happens is you have this new project dialog that pops up. We're not going to cover too much about this, except for you need to make sure that the name is exactly what you want, and you need to make sure that your frame range is 100% correct, that your frame rate matches the settings in your composition and your footage back in After Effects, and that your aspect ratio does as well. And we're just going to go ahead and hit OK. All right, so now inside of Mocha, we're just going to play this file and make sure it looks right. All right, it does. Now we're going to use X as a hotkey to pan over. Our pan tool is right here if we like, but we're just going to pan over so we can pay attention to where we're tracking. We're going to get this started. Now in Mocha, what I tell a lot of people most of the time is that you want to do a track first, and then you want to hook Roto up to that. Now I'm going to track the front of this guy's face. The reason I'm going to track the front of his face is because when you track things in Mocha, Mocha is a planar tracker. So I say that a lot, but what I mean when I say that Mocha is a planar tracker is I mean that it's going to look at pixels moving relative to one another. So the front of his face is moving the same, but the front and side of his face are not moving the same because they're at 90 degrees to one another. So when you track people, think of breaking people down into low poly models, as if they were World of Warcraft models or something like that. And that will give you better data to hook your tracks up to. Now, because he's not got a whole lot of skew information going on, we're going to turn shear and perspective off. And let's talk a little bit about these settings before we move on. It's really important when you are tracking in Mocha to decide whether or not you need shear and perspective along with translation, scale, and rotation. So basically, translation's really obvious. Translation's just the movement around the screen. Scale is also obvious, because it looks like that. Rotation, again, very obvious, but shear and perspective really mess people up. You can think of shear effectively as skew. So, this is shear, it's just movement in X and Y. But perspective is the addition of Z space to your track, so a door opening, a head tilting, and any handheld camera data. Now, inside of this spline, we also have a minimum percent of pixels used. That's what we're tracking. So what Mocha is going to do is it's going to look at 50% of the pixels inside this spline. It's going to find the next frame where it sees that 50% of pixels, and it's going to pull the spline to that area, not the other way around. So we can move the spline any way we want while we're tracking, and it will continue to track. So let's go ahead and track this. I'm going to track one frame backwards because it didn't quite put in the first frame. We're going to track this forwards. All right, so what we end up with is we're tracking large motion, by the way. The reason we're tracking large motion is because that's going to be your general movement for shots. Small motion is going to be almost imperceptible motion. Think a tripod with the wind blowing by it. And then manual track is for literally you are moving the surface to drive the track. It's a completely manual track. All right. Oh, and two more things I want to mention. If you ever have something that is rotating too quickly for Mocha to track, increase your angle value. If you ever have something that is zooming too fast for Mocha to track, increase your zoom value. All right, so we've got this nice, lovely track here. I'm just going to hit play so we can look at that. If we want to see what the track really looks like, we can turn our grid and surface tool on, and we can really see what the track is doing. I really recommend doing that, although when you're trying to get a track nailed down, although you don't really have to do that for Roto, because Roto we just need the basic motion, and we're going to correct from there. So I'm going to turn this grid and surface tool off, and I'm going to turn the gear off in my layer controls. Now this gear is my action item inside of Mocha. This is how we know this is an active layer. So think of the gear makes the layer active. So if you're rendering, it will render. If you're tracking, it will track. So make sure that you use your gears carefully. We're going to lock this guide track right after we name it, because we're going to call this left head track. I might make guide for a second. We're going to lock it. We're going to hide it. Okay. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to come in here, and we are going to draw some very quick roto shapes around this guy's head. All right. So let me just delete that point there. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about X-splines and Bezier splines. So you noticed I used X-splines in order to make this shape. Okay. If you want to use X-splines, I like using them because they're very fast. You can use these handles to relax for a curve and pull tight for corners. So we're going to relax for that curve. We're going to pull tight for those corners. All right. Now, the thing about this is you don't have to use X-splines if you don't want to. I just really like to use them, so don't feel like you have to do exactly what I do. If you want to use Beziers, they're right here, and they're going to be more of a one-to-one sort of transfer over when you export the splines. When you export Beziers, they will double up your points, but they are faster to roto with. So for me, that's worth the trade-off. So now we're going to call this left head roto. Okay. And from here, we're going to come down to our layer properties. Now that's this little tab down here. And in our layer properties, we are going to link to track. So we're going to link left head roto to left head track. So now this roto shape will follow our track. Now you can see it's not perfect. This is why I say Mocha is your roto assistant. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to correct this over time. All right. So here's what I mean by that. We're going to look for the arcs of the animation, okay? Why is that funny? Okay, we're just going to track one more point there. There we go. All right, so we're going to look for the arcs of our animation, okay? So that means this is the most different from where it was, so we're going to go ahead and correct this shape. So we're going to pull this down to the top of his head. Now what I mean is, in animation classes where you're doing the bouncing ball thing, what you want to look for is you want to look essentially for the bounce, right? You're looking for the area of most divergence from the original shape, and then you correct from there, and you tween between those. So what you want to do, and what you always want to do, is you want to scrub between these options. You want to pay attention to what what frame you're on as well. But you want to scrub between these options and look for where it's, again, off the most. So we're going to scrub between these options, and it looks like right here it's off the most again. So what I do is I go ahead and I correct that. And then we tween between those objects. Now I'm using the arrow keys to nudge. If you don't want to use arrow keys to nudge, you can go ahead and go to your preferences here and you can change it. Basically, it should be under, yeah, directional keys, nudge points, or step frames. I like to use it for nudge points, but if you want to use it for step frames, you can, just so you know. All right, and again, we're just going to keep going through here and correcting on the arcs of the animation. So here we're going to correct on this arc. Now, do you see what I mean by correcting on the arc? Like we're looking for the area of most divergence. Okay, we're just going to keep doing this over and over until we get something that, you know, looks like a correct roto shape. Now, the thing about people's faces and the thing about Mocha's roto is edges change a lot when people are talking or when people are wearing, you know, clothes with folds in them and things like that. Edges are going to change quite a bit as we move through the shot. So there's going to be some points where you just have to use common sense as to how many keyframes you're going to have to use. So like if I were trying to track his collar over here, I might have to use more keyframes than I would normally use. Okay, so that's going to be, we're going to correct this here because this is a little off. Just correct that. And then also, don't be afraid to use the transform tool. The transform tool is right here. This is a new feature in like version 3. And what happens is you can go ahead and you can select all your points and you can transform them according to the transform tool. But you can also select individual points and control them with the transform tool. So, you know, don't feel like you have to move everything individually. This tool makes it really nice to animate things on a very natural way by selecting multiple points at the same time so that you don't get a lot of popping points. Okay? So let's just scrub through this right quick.
Hey, Mary, I just want to jump in 1 second and mention,
sure.
You know, a couple of people have asked what's new in Mocha AE that is bundled with the Creative Cloud, and the Transform tool is one of the things there that is new,
right,
as well as some of the other little bits for Roto for color layers, which I'm sure you'll cover in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I will cover the layers as well. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to move on right quick because I don't want to make everything perfect because basically I don't know that you guys want to watch me like roto everything to the nth degree. But what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and I'm going to show you another technique that people use, and that's tracking and roto at the same time. So a lot of times I tell people not to do this. I tell people, you know, do a base track first and then hook your finer roto shape up to it and go from there. And I'm going to show you why I tell people that. So I'm going to call this right head track. Track. Okay. Now, when we go ahead and track this forward, we're going to leave shear on because I want to get some of the motion of his head as it moves back and forth. But I'm not going to cut perspective on. And the reason that I am not going to cut perspective on is because, let's just scrub through. You see how he's moving his head back and forth? Now, that's all fine and good, but if you move back and forth, what happens is Mocha will try to go and track from the area of the least amount of detail to the most amount of detail. So you really want to track from, someplace like here, actually backwards. So let's go ahead and do that. I started from the wrong place. So we're just going to come in here and we're going to track this guy's head. We're just going to come in here. All right, we're going to soften all this and we're going to adjust the points here and there. All right, so from here, what we're going to do, I'm going to leave his ear actually out because his ear is too complicated to try to get in one go. All right, and from here, what we're going to do is we're going to track backwards and forwards. So let's go ahead and track forwards. And it actually does a pretty good job sticking on for that point, but as we get towards the back here, it's going to get kind of funky. And that's because he's tilting his head totally sideways. So when I say that you don't necessarily want to track and roto at the same time, this is what I mean. So we'll go ahead and try to correct this. And you'll see that I'll end up making actually a lot more keyframes. Now, part of the reason I will be making a lot more keyframes is because we're tracking and rotating at the same time. The other part of why I'll be making so many keyframes is because the edges of his face are changing as he tilts his head to the side. So instead of just having the cheek structure that we had going on, we have to account for his chin, his cheek, the edges of his eyebrows, and his hairline. So now when we scrub between two things, it's not going to be like a perfect joining. So let's just come in here and correct this again. So we're going to look for that, again, those major arc changes. All right, so we're going to move this head shape over. We're going to soften everything back again. And we're just going to come in here and adjust this. We're just going to keep doing that until we end up with a shape that looks good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and scrub back. And you can see that, again, we're going to look for the areas where it's the most divergent. So here, it's the most divergent, so we're going to select the back part of his head and move it up. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and adjust his chin and cheek shape as well. We're going to keep scrubbing through to adjust this chin shape there. Like, don't be afraid to go back to your keyframes, and you can always tell where your keyframes are because there's these green dots, and adjust over time. So from here, again, we're going to correct more towards the middle of this arc, and we're going to adjust his chin over there. And now we get like a much more fluid motion as we move. So another thing that you can do if you really want to get your roto perfect, and usually people do want to get their roto perfect, because that's the whole reason why you're cutting out things in the first place. What you can do is you can come in here and you can hit stabilize. Now stabilize will stabilize around your shape. Okay, that is not to be confused with the stabilize module that's in Mocha Pro and not in Mocha for After Effects. Stabilize just stabilizes around your roto shape. What it does is it moves everything around, and you can start to see where your edges come apart. So here I can see that my edges are coming apart, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust to the outside of those edges. Here I can see that my edge doesn't look so good either. Adjust to there, and again pull to here. We also have thumbnail tools where you can pay attention to what the dot is doing. So if you look here, we have a previous keyframe, the current keyframe, and the next keyframe. If we scrub between that, we can see what our points are doing and where they are sitting on the edge of this drawing. So we have a lot of troubleshooting tools in here for you to get really solid tracks. Really solid roto shapes. So also, I really do want to stress, it's really not important to have a perfect track for a roto shape. It's much more important to have a fluid motion, okay? Because fluid motion is what sells it. So you can have some imperfections in your roto just so long as it looks like it's animating naturally. If you have to worry about popping keyframes, your roto shapes are always going to look bad. Now, if you want to delete keyframes, or if you want to go to different keyframes, we have some keyframe tools over here. Our keyframes basically, here's our key, basically guide. And this is previous keyframe, that's next keyframe. So previous keyframe, previous keyframe, previous keyframe, next keyframe, next keyframe. Okay, so you see it jumps between the keyframes. Now, if I wanted to delete this keyframe, I could delete it. If I wanted to come in here and add a keyframe, I could. Basically, if I had to go to a point where I hadn't made a keyframe and I wanted to add one, I could add one. Or I could simply move the edge of my spline because I have auto key on. Now, auto key, basically, every time I move a spline, we'll put an auto key there, right? So it will automatically key that keyframe. And you can either key that by the spline, or you can key it by the point. By default, it's set to spline. But if you want to keyframe it by the points, you go to View, and you go to Keyframe Controls. Then we have this tool here. We can drop it wherever we like. We can drop it here. Here are our keyframe controls. We can key by spline or key by points. So if you want to select all your points, what you do is you click and drag all over everything. So basically, whenever you want to select points, you click and drag. So you click and drag around a few, or you click and drag around all. All right? So in this case, I'm just clicking and dragging. All right? Now, we have one more thing that I want to talk to you about keyframe tools, and that's the Uber key. So let's say that I got the overall shape of his head wrong at the first part of this demo. What I would do is I would hit Uber key on, and let's say I was correcting for fuzzy hair or something like that. I would move these all out. All right, and because I used the Uber key, it will be that way for the entirety of the shot. So it's a ripple edit. All right, so that can be very useful for doing a lot of roto tasks. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and correct these back down to where they need to be. And we're going to go from there. When I say popping keyframes, I'll show you exactly what I mean, actually. So when I say popping keyframes, here's what I mean. Turn auto key back on. I mean when you start to fiddle with Roto, and you start to pay too much attention to edges, and you start to think that, well, if I could just get it a little more perfect if I did this, and I could just get it a little more perfect if I did this, and what you end up with is you end up with, you see how the rotor shapes are popping? You end up with popping keyframes. So there you go. And yeah, if you want to use proxy files, they're right here. You can do half size or quarter size or full size. I'm working on full. All right, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we are going to go over how to get rid of these keyframes. We're just going to delete those right quick. Delete, delete. Okay, and then we're going to talk about finishing the shot because I don't want to take too long in the shot, so we're going to sort of speed up. But I thought it was pretty important to go over those overlays. Now we're going to go ahead and come in here and we're going to actually just track in bulk. We're going to track in Roto this torso of this guy. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to track the top part of his body while because he moves his hand down here at the bottom. And we're just going to go ahead and we're going to track this backwards. We're going to, well, actually we're going to name this, we're going to call this right head Roto. Okay, and we're going to name this left body. Okay, and we're just going to go ahead and turn the gear off, lock everything for the previous layers that we've tracked, because a lot of times you can write back up your work, and we're going to go ahead and hit track backwards. So it does a pretty good job of hanging on because he's not really moving that much. You know, it's very subtle movement. Mocha's pretty good about grabbing subtle movement. And from here, we're going to track forwards. All right, so now we have this sort of track, and we've avoided his arm. What we're going to do from here is we're going to actually come back to our original first point, and we're going to just, actually, that was not our original point. Our original point was here. We're going to pull these points down, and so now they are down for the entirety of the shot. We can start to correct our roto shape from here. So we'll just go ahead and correct this corner, and I'm going to soften a lot of this with our X-splines. We're going to pull that tight here, pull this tight here for a corner, pull this and this tight for corners. Okay, and we're just going to keep going. So we're going to adjust there, and we're going to adjust here, and we're going to actually delete that point, and we're going to correct it where it's wrong. If you find that you've made an adjustment to a shape and you want it to match to the previous adjustment of the shape, just delete your keyframe and then redo it. So what we'll do here is, again, we'll look for those arcs of the animation. So I'm going to look for the arc of his collar moving, and we're going to look for the arc of this shirt moving, okay, and go from there. We can see that he tilts his head quite a bit, so we need to adjust that edge. All right, so now we're just going to correct here at the end of the shot. So we're just going to come in here, correct from here, correct that. We're going to pull this down and keep going. All right, and again, we're going to look for the arcs of the animation. So here are our arcs. I'm going to adjust it there and keep going. So that looks pretty good, and I can see that we have some adjustments we need to make here. All right. So for demo purposes, that's going to be close enough. Now, that's his body. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and lock that and hide it. But we got to do something about his arm down here. So what we're going to do is we are going to track his arm. Now, here's the thing about his arm. As we look at his hand, one of the things going on with his hand is that it is coming towards screen and arcing down. Okay, so we actually don't want to track the shear in perspective on that because that will not give us the best results as far as Mocha is concerned. So we're going to go ahead and track translation, scale, and rotation. Actually, I'm going to turn stabilize off so that doesn't look quite so weird, and keep tracking. All right, so what we have is the general motion of his hand. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call this hand rough track, and we're going to hook his hand roto up to this. Now, because the angle is changing on his hand so much, it's actually going to be a little bit of a pain to do the roto for this. So we're going to just come in here, and we're probably going to end up having to make a lot of keyframes. Now, the good thing about making a lot of keyframes on something that's moving very quickly is you won't end up having as much popping of keyframes because the shape is changing so much so quickly that you shouldn't have to worry about it. So we're going to instead of animating every like 5 or 10 frames, which is, that's really the benefit of working in Mocha, is that instead of animating every other frame, you end up animating every 5 or 10 frames. But instead of doing that, we're going to end up animating like every couple of frames for his hand. And that's just because it's not going to look terribly correct if we don't. So we'll just come in here and correct this, correct that, scoot this in, adjust this point. And basically we're just changing the overall shape of our hand shape. So, and again, we can see that that didn't quite work out perfectly, so we adjust it here, and we adjust it here. All right, so there's going to be some parts where you just have to do hand roto, and that's just the way it is. For instance, if you are rotoscoping a ballerina who is spinning around in a circle over and over and over again, like, unfortunately, that's just going to be a whole lot of hand-done work. Now, you can use Mocha to track her general position on the screen, but you're still going to have to do a lot of corrective animation over the top of that in order to fix it. Now, the last thing we're going to do here is we're just going to grab his arm. So we're just going to come in here and grab this arm shape. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and call this elbow, call this right hand, and roto. And we are going to go ahead and call this right arm. And what we're going to do is we're just going to hook right arm up to our body track, and we're going to correct it where it's wrong. So if it's wrong here, we're just going to bring this shape down, and we're going to, again, look for the arcs. So we're going to connect here, and we're going to correct here, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so from here, I want to talk a little bit about exports because I don't want to spend too long on the intro part of this demo. So let's just go ahead and go to our export shape data. So I'm going to select one of my layers, it doesn't matter, and I'm going to go to export shape data. I'm going to do all visible layers, and the reason I'm doing that is because I have hidden my previous guide tracks. Now, we can only export to Mocha shape data for After Effects from Mocha for After Effects Creative Cloud. So we're going to copy this to the clipboard, and we're going to jump over to After Effects, and we're going to make sure that we're selected on our layer. Again, we're going to just look at our settings for our footage. So again, 24 frames per second, 1920 by 1080, and it's going to be 1:1. So same thing for our composition. We're going to check those settings, and again, they need to be the same. We're going to go ahead and come in here to our simple movie, and we're going to go to Edit, and we are either going to go to Paste Mocha Mask, okay, which is going to give us line masks for everything that we have tracked. Or what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to make a new layer here. And what we'll do is instead of doing a paste Mocha mask, we'll just paste. Okay, now this paste will paste everything in as an effect. Now the thing about this is as an effect is that this will respect edge transparency. So if I wanted to come into Mocha, what I didn't quite cover is that if you want to do soft edges inside of Mocha, you can. So what you do is I'm going to turn my mats on so you can see what I'm doing. Turn this on. What we're going to do is we're going to unlock his head, and I'm going to select inner points, and we're going to pull these inner points inside for per point feathering for the shape on his head. Now this will translate over if you use per point feathering, if that's what you like. Now let's move on pretty quickly. The other thing I want to talk about, oh, actually, no, I want to show you this right quick. We're going to unlock all our layers. Something I want to show you guys is if you need to group for, let's say, for organizational purposes, we're going to go ahead and we are going to hook basically we're going to select all our layers to the guy on the left, and we're going to hit folder, and that will put everything into a folder that I can now call left guy. Line if I like. Okay, and now everything inside of this folder will be blue, and everything on the right, well, here, we'll just drop this in there as well. We'll just make that the same. And then to the right, we're just going to group him into his own folder, and we'll just turn him red. So let me change this to blue, and hit OK, and change this to green. Okay, so now if I turn my mats on and I turn like all mats on, I can see that this is red and this is blue, and this is how you can check your mats in a really quick way to make sure that you know what is overlapping where. All right, so we're going to move on right quick. I'm going to close this, and we're going to go ahead and hit save. And I'm actually going to close After Effects as well so that I free up some more memory. We're going to hit save. All right, and we're going to move on to some other files that we have. Let me actually close this. Oh, if you want to see what this looks like completely done, these are our, let me just go to all mats. This is what the shot looks like completely rotoed in Mocha. It takes a little longer when you're not explaining everything. I mean, it takes a little less time when you're not explaining everything. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close that. Let's say. All right, and now we're going to move on to other shots. I want to talk a little bit about occlusions, okay, and how you avoid those in Mocha, because a lot of times what you'll have to do is you'll have to roto something that is behind an object. So in this case, we need to roto these girls, and these girls are behind this object, and this object has a lot of problems on it because it's got a lot of reflections and it's got a lot of transparency. And now Mocha is going to see that stuff, so let's just go ahead and show you how to work with this. All right, so I'm going to turn these off, hide them, lock them, put them away. But let's talk a little bit about how we would track this screen in order to hold it out and what we do to track underneath it. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to draw a shape around this surface area, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to cut things out of this shape. So I'm going to use the Add to X-Spline tool. If you were using Bezier's, you would use the Add to Bezier tool. So we're going to come in here and use our Add to X-Spline, and we're just going to cut this section out. All right, and what that will do is, if I turn on my mat, is that will give us this area to track. All right, and it will only look at that area when we're tracking. So I'm going to call this screen holdout. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and track this. We're going to use translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. The reason we're doing that is because it's tilting quite a bit. So we're going to go ahead and track that forward. Now you can tell it tracks a little bit slower, and one of the reasons it tracks a little bit slower is because this is quite a large amount of footage to track. Now I can see that it's slipping a little bit, so what I want to do is I probably want to pay attention to my shapes, and I might want to change what my shapes are looking at. If you ever have a problem tracking, one of the best things in the world you can do is adjust your tracking area. So we're going to adjust our tracking area. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm actually going to pull these pieces out entirely. All right, and we're going to go from here. So don't ever be afraid to stop what you're doing and correct your shape. You should get better data if you do that. So I can see that for some reason this is not cooperating, but that's okay. What we'll do is, if we really want it to cooperate, is we'll just adjust the shape and keep going forward. Because it's not really important that we track this really well. What's important is that we hold it out. So we'll just go ahead and brute force it right now, because this is a demo and I don't have time to figure out why it's not behaving properly. We'll just go ahead and adjust this and keep moving forward. And in fact, here, let's do this. Let's pull this out so that we can get that extra hand data. That will absolutely help. So we'll just go ahead and track from there. There we go. All right. So once this is done tracking, what we're going to do is we're going to pull this out into a wider shape. Basically, we're just going to adjust the garbage map. Keep going. All right. That's just not cooperating at all. Okay. Well, we'll figure it out. For this, I'm just going to go ahead and garbage mat it, as opposed to worrying about it. So we'll just go ahead and garbage mat that out. And this is where I can show you how handy the transform tool is. We'll just go ahead and put it here. Fix that. All right. So what we end up with is something that we can work with. So we're just going to go ahead and adjust this, pull this in, okay, and pull these corners in. All right, so what we'll do from here is we're just going to go ahead and use our Uber key tool to crop in all of the fuzzy, blurry, reflective surfaces that we have on this tool, and we're going to use this as a holdout for the rest of our tracks on this shot. So let's just go ahead and finish doing that. And we'll just do it like this. Well, this is your add points to spline tool. I'm going to use this add points to spline to, well, something's clearly wrong with my track. I'm just going to pull this out. All right. Sometimes things just go funky. Okay. All right. Now, turn our auto key back on. So this is going to be our garbage mat. It's going to be a very rough garbage mat. What we're going to use is we're going to track this girl underneath it using this garbage mat. So let's say that I want to do the roto for this little girl's body over here. We're going to turn our mats off. We're going to turn our screen holdout off, and we're going to lock the spline. Now, here's the thing about this. We're going to keep this at the top of the layer pile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to track the edge of this girl's body. And we're just going to go ahead and use translation, scale, rotation, and shear. And we're going to call this purple jacket. Okay, and we're going to just go ahead and track backwards and track forwards. Now, it doesn't matter that, I'm sorry, we're going to put this under screen holdout. The reason we do that, because you'll notice how this moves a little bit when the tool they're using comes over the top. What we're going to do is we're going to hold that out. So we use the screen holdout over the top. And what this does is this cuts out this shape from everything underneath it, because Mocha treats everything at the top of the layer pile as closest to the camera and everything at the bottom of the layer pile as furthest from the camera. So that being said, we're going to put this above, put this below. It's a user-defined tool. So we're just going to go ahead and keep tracking forward. And what it will do is it will stay on her body even though we're moving this over the top. And we're going to use this track to drive everything else on her. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to call this, we're going to lock this, and we're going to hide it, and we're going to do some nicer roto shapes for her body. So we're going to come in here, all right, and we are going to call this purple jacket roto. Okay, and we're going to, again, move it under the screen holdout, and we are going to link it because we're using link to track to link it to the previous track to purple jacket. And now we are just going to fix it where it's off. So we're going to go back to the front of the shot, and this is the area of most divergence. So we're going to go ahead and correct our shape. Now, this is again where the transform tool comes in really handy, because you can go ahead and adjust multiple points at once in a broad sweeping motion that will help with the natural look of the shape. So we're going to come in here again, and we're going to correct this over the top. And we're going to come in here, we're going to move these over to the side. All right, so that we end up with some nice looking shapes. Okay, so again, we're going to correct on arcs of animation. So that doesn't look right, so we're going to adjust it. This is what I mean by the edges constantly changing. So when the edges constantly change, it's going to always mean just a little bit more work for you, because you have to compensate for things that are not moving in a planar way. And the reason for that is that Mocha is a planar tracker, which I've stated that many times. What that means is it tracks pixels that are moving relative to one another. So that means if you have pixels on your frame that are not moving relative to one another, it's going to be a little difficult for Mocha to hang on to edges. Now, eventually that might not be the case, but for right now, that's the way it is, and that's the way the tracker works. So we're going to come in here and adjust this as well, and that's going to be good enough for this demo. Now, the same thing if we want to do, if we want to track her head and stuff like that, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and lock this shape. We're going to come in here, and I'm going to try to track the side of her head here. And I'm also going to come down here using the Add to X-Point tool, and I'm going to grab the bottom of her face here. Now, the reason that I'm avoiding this section in here is because there are reflections. If you look, we'll just look right quick so that you can see. Do you see how there are reflections that go over her forehead and her face quite a bit? The reason that we want to avoid them is because Mocha will see them and treat it like texture data, even though it's not, because Mocha is essentially a texture tracker, and it tracks large swaths of texture moving the same direction. So we're going to call this girl head track, and we are going to go ahead and move this again under screen holdout. So screen holdout is at the top because we want to hold it out, and what we're going to do from here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to track, I think, just translation, scale, and rotation only. And I can see that we popped off a little bit. So because we popped off a little bit, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to correct the shape here. We're going to track backwards. Okay. And from here, we're going to track forwards. Okay. And so now what we're going to do is we'll hook up a finer roto shape to that. In this case, it's just going to be a very quick circle. Okay? And we're going to go ahead and link that to girl head track. Okay? And then we're going to, again, adjust it over time. So that is sort of how you track around occlusions. Now, I'm not going to spend too much more time on this because I have one more shot that I want to go over, and we are running out of time. So I'm going to
yes,
go
we are. Yeah, we're getting close,
yeah.
but let's go for it. While you load up
Okay.
that shot, I'll just sort of cover some of the things that you've been talking about. Certainly, one of the things that Mary's been covering is to intelligently set up your project, and how you set up your track layers is quite important in Mocha, and it's going to save you a lot of time, like for a difficult occlusion shot like she just showed. Where your holdout layers will basically, or objects that are closer to the camera, will go above your other track layers, and then you can
Right.
intelligently link up those shapes to your tracks. So why don't you go ahead?
Oh yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what I mean. Okay, so what I want to talk about right quick, because we've done a lot of close-up shots, and the reason we've done a lot of close-up shots is because we didn't have a whole lot of time. So I want to show you what you do when you have a full-body human. When you have a full-body human, you need to split them up into a paper doll scenario. And so what I mean by that is, you see how we split her at the hand, at the arm, at the upper arm. We have her upper torso, her lower torso. If she had like pants on, we would do upper thighs and like a pelvis, but she's got a skirt on, so we just do her skirt. And then we've got the lower legs and feet separately, right? We've got her head separately, and again, we've paper dolled her arms back here. One of the things I want to, and it's connected to another shape, that's going to be your join layers tool. Now, that is a really cool tool inside of Mocha. What that does is, let's just go ahead and unlock all of this mess. And we can actually do multi-selection in Mocha now as well, so we unlock everything at once. And that was a long time coming. So we use our join layers tool, and what we can do is we can hook points, okay, to each other. Let me just move this part so you can see. You can hook points onto other shapes, and that way they will move with each other throughout the shot. So that's a really important thing to point out. And they move separately based on the tracks. Now, I don't like, this is a really easy track, so I kind of want to show you on this guy over here who's a little bit more difficult to track to do this process. So let's go ahead and come in here, and what we're going to do is I'm going for an area of the shot where he is the most perpendicular to the screen. Now I do that for a reason. I do that because our surface tool needs to be able to hang on, and in order to hang on, it needs the most information possible. It just so happens that when you present a parallel surface to the screen, that's the most information possible. But the same thing applies to areas of blur. So you want to track from least blurry to most blurry, and size, and so from largest to smallest. So we're going to come in here, and we're going to track the front part of his arm. All right, just come in here, and we're going to go ahead and track translation, scale, and rotation only, okay, because he's moving quite a bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to track backwards. All right, so you see how we're tracking from areas of the most detail to the least, and we end up hanging on a little bit better. Okay, now what we can do from here is we can either come in here and we can correct this shape down and use our same tracking shape as our roto shape, or we can go ahead and make a new shape. But I'm going to go ahead and use our tracking shape as a roto shape. I'm going to call this left arm top. Okay, and we are going to track backwards, well, not track backwards, but move backwards, look for that arc of animation, and correct the shape again. So we're going to bring his shoulder up, we're going to bring this in, we're going to pull this forward. Okay, let's just correct that. Now, if I see that he's got a lot of folds here that I want to get, I'm going to use my Add Points to Spline tool. I'm going to pull this out, pull this in, pull that out, pull that in. Okay, and we're going to soften those shapes a little bit. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually scrub back through the shot, and what you'll see is that my other keyframe, those points will just align back to the center area between the points that I put them in. So what we'll do is we'll just correct this again. We'll just pull this in, pull that out, this in, pull that out. What we'll get, if we've done everything correctly, is we'll get those folds moving properly, okay? So a lot of people sometimes wonder what the difference between, like, why would you use Mocha to Roto instead of using the Roto brush or similar tools? The thing is once we get back here in the dark parts of the shadows to the edge of his chair, you're going to need to make a decision as an artist as to where his arm ends and where the chair begins. And computers are really bad at making decisions. So, you're an artist, you're the one who makes the calls. Okay? So keep that in mind when you're rotoscoping, that using splines tends to give you way more control than auto roto tools, which are still amazing on their own, but they don't give you as much choice, and choice is key when you're making artistic decisions. All right, now we're going to go ahead and scroll backwards. I saw a question there that's the more precise the tracking shape is, the more precise the roto shape. It's actually the more precise the track. So the deal with that is, if your track is super accurate in a planar way, then your roto shape will be more accurate, but there is not much you can do about edges changing that are not going to require manual work. So is that am I expanding on that properly, Ross?
Yeah, I think also possibly that question was when you're sometimes you've used some examples where you create a shape that that is the track and the roto shape rather than linking.
Hmm.
And I think maybe
Yeah,
the question was, well, how precise does the shape have to be before you track it? And often, it actually having a loose shape will be good for edges. To get a good track, it really depends on the movement of the shot.
exactly. And you can always come in and add more points. So in this case, let's say we added a lot of points here with the ruffles of his sleeve, and we started tracking backwards. It doesn't give us the best data in the whole world. If we had gone a little outside of that, we probably would have gotten better data. Now, that being said, sometimes it's just not worth it to mess with it. So what you can do is if you're in a real hurry and you just really don't have time to worry about, perfect arcs of animation and things like that, you can just go ahead and adjust it on the fly. So here again, we'll just pull it up, adjust it on the fly, and keep going and adjust this on the fly. All right, so we're running into a point where we need to start asking questions if we're gonna ask them, because I don't want to. Last
Yeah,
time we ended up not having enough time.
it's funny when we were discussing this webinar, we were saying, well, can we actually cover Roto? Do we have a full hour and a half? So we decided to make the webinar shorter than our previous ones, but certainly, there's even more we could be covering for rotoscoping. So I'm sure we'll readdress some Roto in future webinars. A couple of just review points that maybe we can cover. One was
Mm-hmm.
joining points or linking the points. Just want to
Sure, let's do
double.
that with these two layers.
Yeah, just exactly.
Okay, so we have these two layers, and we want them to seam up perfectly. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pan over and we're going to align some points. So let's look at where our points are going to be. So we've got some points here, some points here, and we've got some points here, and we can adjust this here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use our our join layers tool. It's this thing that looks like a sort of vampire smile or like an upside down ladybug's head or something like that. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to hook these points to one another by clicking and dragging them over the top. And again, we're going to hook this by clicking and dragging them over the top. And now these 2 points are hooked together. Okay? So, and if we really want to make it seamless in the middle, what we'll do is we'll delete this center point, and we only have 1 point between the two of them, so we'll just hook this right to here, okay, and we'll use our movement tool to just move this up through here. And now what we will have is we will have 2 points between 2 shapes that are joined right together. Okay, and
So
if we want to move that, if we want to move this like, in a fluid way, we would just go ahead and
yeah, so this
yeah.
is the join layers tool, which I kind of call a parent-child relationship between points from various shapes. The cool thing about this is that each of those shapes are linked to their own trackers, but the points can then be linked up. So it's certainly not like a inverse kinematics or any kind of feature like that, but it can be very useful for this kind of thing where you're trying to make a joint or something like that, or especially. This request was asked for quite a lot when we first introduced the clean plate module in Mocha Pro. Or actually, that comes from Moki, but because a lot of times that you need to basically have a seamless mask to do a clean plate.
Right. You can also just delete. You can delete points as well anytime during the shape, and it'll delete it for the entirety of the shot, but you won't have to worry about it messing up your shape. All right. All
Yeah,
right. Can we
let's
move
go
into
through a
major
couple.
questions?
Yeah, there's. I'm trying to see what other questions that we can really cover. Certainly there's many people have asked, the differences between, we didn't really even cover Mocha Pro at all, but we just want to,
Oh,
just to
we
mention,
didn't cover the tracking exports.
yeah, let's just talk really quickly. The difference between the bundled Mocha AE, which comes with After Effects Creative Cloud. We also have Mocha AE V3, which is basically an upgrade from that product, which adds support for Final Cut 7, for Boris effects, for hit film, as well as for past After Effects, for older After Effects legacy products like CS5 or CS4. So if you do want to get like sort of the most recent Mocha features, but you're still running CS5 or CS4 for any reason, CS6 for any reason, you could always upgrade to Mocha AEV3, which will support the old After Effects. It also actually adds a new 3D camera tracking module, which we just created this past year. And then Mocha Pro is the application that a lot of users who use Nuke or Flame or Quantel or other systems like that, because Mocha Pro adds a lot more export formats, as well as some advanced modules that we've covered in past tutorials, like the lens distortion module, the camera solve 3D camera solve module, and Marion and my favorite, the remove module.
Yeah, and that's true. And we also export our shape data to all kinds of different programs. So if you remember earlier when I showed Mocha for After Effects Creative Cloud, it only exports to Mocha shape data for After Effects, but Mocha Pro exports to Mocha shape data for Final Cut for After Effects, Fake Roto shapes, Nuke Roto nodes, Nuke Roto paint nodes, Flame Gmask scripts, and Combustion Gmask scripts. We also will render out our we can export our rendered shapes, okay, and that will render out shapes that you can use. Let me just go ahead and come in here into our render. So for instance, I did this shot earlier. You can see it renders out mats as well. Now the other thing that we can do with that is we can also export it entirely to Nuke. So if I want to export all of this to Nuke, I basically come in here, I go export shape data, I go export to Nuke Roto paint nodes, copy to the clipboard, and we go over to Nuke, and it is literally a paste. So if I just hit paste, you can see that this is the same node that I just hooked up to a merge, and you can see what that looks like here inside of Nuke.
Yeah, it seems the stream is a little slow today.
It's kind of ridiculous to rotoscope. Oh, are we're having some streaming issues?
The stream is a little slow today, and we do apologize for that. But yeah, the there it goes for me anyways. Really, probably depends on your connection speed, but the copy and paste relationship between Mocha Pro to Nuke is similar to the relationship between After Effects, where you can just basically keep both applications running at the same time and copy your roto masks from Mocha Pro right into Nuke, and you can select them all and then paste them all into one node, or you could separate them into separate nodes. It's really up to the user. Some people did ask about if we'd be adding this kind of functionality to the workflow for Flame and for other applications, and that is something that we are looking into for version 4, which is the ability to basically to batch export formats for all the formats, and general improvements for all our export formats, which is something that we are looking into. At this point, I think we're basically out of time, and I really apologize that we didn't cover all the questions, but certainly you guys know where to find us. We're on our Facebook. Mary, do you want to bring up the slide that you have for all the great places to find us?
It's up. So
okay. Okay, so
we're experiencing some serious delay.
Yes, we are. So yeah, if you go down to your last slide, I'm just catching up there. Okay, so yeah, you can find us on the web, obviously on our website, imagineyoursystems.com. If you forget that, you can also type mocha-pro.com. You'll get to the same website. We have online forums where Mary and our product manager, Martin Brennan, are always on, and you can ask questions. We also love to see user clips posted to Vimeo and YouTube. If you just tag your clips Mocha, then we'll find them, and we love to share your work. You can check out our Facebook page, where we are often promoting events and even sometimes giving away some freebies or discounts. And Twitter as well, where Martin and Mary regularly post tips for users as well. So at this point, Mary, thank you so much for your time. I know it's difficult to be rotoing and talking at the same time. It would be very difficult for me to do that, but you're certainly a pro at it. And I think that, we'll revisit some more roto tips in the future.
Exactly. We might look into doing longer tutorials where we go really in depth, and condense the information down.
Yes, some.
But also, don't forget if you don't forget if you have footage that you want to share that you want to see in a future webinar, please share that with us. And if you have trouble getting in touch, contact us on our website or on Facebook. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, 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 that's correct. Yeah, and also as far as for more training, you can always check out our website where we do have lots more training available. And then for those who want even more training, we do have a couple products that you can buy from Curious Turtle. Makes a couple different downloadable training series that actually have media projects, documentation that you could follow along with projects if that's the type of learning that works for you. So at this point, we're going to sign off and thank you very much for attending.
All right, thank you.